all agree that was a very important contribution, and it raises a number of questions in terms of the future of Afghanistan and the conflicts that are likely to emerge on a range of issues. Thank you, Pastor Masoud. Now we go to the last speaker.
Distinguished guests, excellencies, colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I thank ISAS and National University of Singapore for organizing this kind of a workshop. And I hope that it will contribute to the future discussions around Afghanistan. The first thing I want to mention is that I'm not representing the UN here. I'm here as an Afghan. I speak for my own. The second thing, being the last speaker, I'm exhausting the already tired audience. And much of stuff were covered by other speakers from Afghanistan. So I may need to go a bit quickly on whatever I have. But the most important point is that whatever I want to say is to reflect the voices of people which have been remained unheard and are worth to be heard. And this is linked with my human rights background as a human rights advocate. Because people of Afghanistan want the processes to be inclusive, and they feel that they are excluded from most of the decisions, whether regarding the development of the country or peace process or engagement or disengagement of the international community and international military, whatsoever, because most of the policy makers think that people don't know. This is perception of the people. I'm not saying that the policy maker say that. The people think that they are excluded. So this is the first message. Transition is inevitable, and this is the will of people of Afghanistan and all of the troops contributing countries. If you are happy or not, it will happen. If not today, later, it will happen. But there have been efforts underway, and now we are quite much sure that it will happen. And it was even initially when the international military came to Afghanistan, it was part of the plan that eventually they will go back. And as ISAF's mandate clearly mentioned it, the fourth phase of ISAF's operation in Afghanistan was transition. The first one was assessment and preparation. The second was geographic expansion. These two are completed. The third one was stabilization, which is still underway. And the fourth phase was transition. Of course, there was one last phase, which was called redeployment, in case it doesn't work. Well, as President of Afghanistan put it in Kabul conference and many other of his speeches, this transition is expected to be a whole of the government transition. It will cover the security transition, political transition, economic transition, development, and everything. Now, if we look at the changes around transition, what already has happened initially, people of Afghanistan were not expecting that probably the international military will leave. But when the Dutch left and the Canadian left Afghanistan, it really changed people's mind. And they realized that it's the time that we will be left and transition will happen. So, but there are plans underway, and it's not clear, particularly for the people, it's not clear what's going on and what will be the next step. And this transition is not started today. There were some other steps taken earlier, like in 2009, President Obama announced troop surge, and in addition to that, upon recommendation of General McChrystal and the counterinsurgency doctrine of General Petraeus, that is clear, hold and belt. They also sent some civilians, US civilians, to help in development of Afghanistan. In addition to that, the US and NATO training mission focused on improving security sector of Afghanistan and increasing the number of Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police, as well as train them and equip them. And ultimately, another government-led program was Afghanistan Local Police, which some people know it as local militia, or well, that's a little bit different from local militia, but some people know it as local militia. Local people is community-based protection mechanism, and every district of Afghanistan is planned to, well, of course, the districts that are in need of protection are planned to have at least 300 people to guard the villages and provide protection to the people. In addition to that, government of Afghanistan also have taken some steps in order to coordinate whatever aid money is being channeled to Afghanistan. A joint coordination and management board was created after the conference in London, and its support of the international community in 2008 in Paris conference. And in 2010, in Kabul conference, the government of Afghanistan, in line with Afghanistan National Development Strategy, developed the national priority programs in 22, which include 22 programs for development of different sectors, and of course some improvement in terms of financial management and strategic plan by Ministry of Finance, and improving reporting to ensure transparency by the Ministry of Finance about whatever aid is channeled to Afghanistan. But there are some challenges ahead of transition. The first one is spread of insecurity, which almost all of the speakers talked about. But if we go back and look at the spread of the insecurity, how and what factors resulted in this, people say that the first problem was that initially when the US and coalition forces invaded Afghanistan, they were willing to subcontract the war. They subcontracted the war to private security firms. Even some people in rural areas, like in Orizon, where Dutch were stationed, or some people were talking about, well, it may not be true, but people had this perception that even they guard the PRT, or the Provincial Reconstruction Team, the premises, by a private security company. So this was the level of understanding of people. Whether this might be because of disengagement, of lack of proper communication, or whatsoever. So, in addition to that, some of the tactical mistakes led to disappointment of people. For example, night raids, civilian casualties, and one elder from Kandahar, from Panjwai district, which was very hot in terms of fight, says that about one of the Taliban ex-lead commander, that it is because of these operations that now all his family members have joined the Taliban. He talks about one of the Taliban commanders who had laid down his gun and he wanted to reintegrate in the society, but every other day the intelligence and the international military were after him and interrogating him and asking him questions and taking him in custody for a day or two, and ultimately he left. Also, in the context of extended families in Afghanistan, if you kill one person from one family, you're creating more than 10 enemies for you, because that person has father and uncles and cousins and of course children and children of their cousins. So it makes a big family, and all of them will be your enemy in the context of extended families in Afghanistan. So this was one of the causes of deteriorating security and strengthening the Taliban front. Well, now people also have some concerns about the steps ahead, particularly boosting the Afghan National Security Forces and Afghan local police. Retention of soldiers, it has been a huge problem. Motivation has been a problem. Most of the soldiers feel that they do not have motivation. Financing if we go towards expanding our security forces, financing that is a problem, and it was already discussed. About the ALP or Afghan local police, people are concerned that in the absence of government's action, they are violating the human rights of the villagers or the people around them. So there are also some other challenges mentioned by people in the very rural context. They are not happy with the government and they expect good governance. They are complaining of corruption in different levels of the government, taking from the very low, which is people have to pay for ordinary services, to the higher ranks of the government, and even back in the countries who are providing aid to Afghanistan. Rule of law has been a problem, and this is one of the recommendations of people, that formal justice system is not enough, because in most of cases we need peace. We should promote peace and reconciliation among communities, and the court cannot bring peace because the court has to implement the law. So they are recommending that the informal justice mechanisms, that's called jirga or shura, should be somehow integrated into the justice system. Well, one suggestion was allowing notary public to work to take care of many of the issues in Afghanistan. It shouldn't be the court to go after each and everything. Even if you, in Afghanistan, if you want to get your marriage certificate, you have to go through a very lengthy process inside the government or in the court. That shouldn't happen. It will reduce the burden of the government. So other issues are capacity of the government. It's a lot of professionals are positioned in other sectors. For example, only in Ministry of Finance, we have 150 doctors working in Ministry of Finance, medical doctors, and that exists everywhere. And NGOs are leaving the government out of human resources. Well, people are still not sure about the success of transition, but they hope that their transition will happen because the international community has committed, the US has committed that they will try to make transition to happen. But a lot of things are to be clarified. For example, the details of the US-Afghan strategic partnership, and the President Karzai announced in December that he will go to sign strategic partnership with the UK, France, Italy. The contents are not clear, and talks about the insurgents or the negotiation and peace and reconciliation, the direction is not very clear yet, and the next conference is on the way. But people want their three messages, to air the three messages. The first one is they want inclusive processes. The second is they don't want to lose the gains of the last 10 years. And the third message is that people call for justice. in each and every process that happens in the future. Thank you very much.
I think we have three very good presentations that set the stage for, I think, a very, very interesting discussion at the stage. But before I open up for discussion, I just wanted to pose two issues to the panel as a whole, where we can get some brief, quick, sharp responses to those two issues that came out of the three presentations, which are more crisp and within time. The first question is, the case for optimism is based on, I think, from Sharifi's presentation, on the assumption that the US will stay the course, and that there is political will in the US to maintain its current declaratory commitment to Afghanistan. You yourself mentioned in your presentation, of course, if you take away that assumption, the whole scenario changes. So what I want to know from the panel is, I mean, how are you willing to bet your bottom dollar, as the Americans say, on the Americans staying the course? Because the US itself is going through a difficult phase. Its own domestic situation today is far more complicated. And US is not saying today what it said 5 years ago. US is not saying today what it said 10 years ago. So therefore, do you really bet on the US? And the international community, much of Europe is really a dependent variable, not an independent variable. So therefore, how confident are you in terms of the US staying the course in Afghanistan in the next few years? The second question, and I want the panel to respond briefly, is the case for pessimism address on the history of divide within the Afghan elites, the political elites. And there, I think, the case of pessimism today magnifies at this point of time. Now, for example, in the talks with Taliban, Ambassador Masoud pointed out the irreconcilable contradiction between the value systems of the Taliban and the others in Pakistan. But the fact is, both Kabul and the international community think talking to the Taliban is a good idea. And that everyone is for a political solution, therefore everyone is for the talks, probably except the Taliban. We don't know fully whether they're committed to talks or not. Now, given the fact, if there are talks, would it actually sharpen the divide within the existing structure in Kabul? And whether the current, the old Marxist way, the correlation of forces in Kabul, will it survive a serious negotiation with the Taliban? Because in situations like this, when you start talking to a long-time adversary, the first casualty most of the times is the internal balance, the internal coherence within those negotiations. So these two questions, if I might have quick, sharp reactions from three of you, starting with discussion.
Well, since I sounded very optimistic, I'm just going to talk about the first one. As you said, yes, my entire presentation was based on the assumption that the United States, as well as the international community generally, will remain in Afghanistan after 2014, of course, militarily. The reason for this optimism, I think, has to do with the costs and with the benefits of staying in the United States for the United States. Well, first of all, right now the main concern in the United States is the cost of military presence, their military presence in Afghanistan, both in terms of financial costs as well as the human life costs. Right now, both of them are high. But with a substantial reduction in their troop levels in Afghanistan, both costs will substantially go down. And if you weigh those reduced costs against the benefits of them being in Afghanistan, it sort of gives you a sense of optimism of their presence, their longer-term presence in Afghanistan. And the benefits are also the prevention mainly the prevention of security threats originating from Afghanistan for the United States and generally for the Western societies. I don't think, yes, I've lived quite for many years in the United States, and right now the level of public opinion in the United States is sort of low toward their presence in Afghanistan, but at the same time, I don't think any American would want to be in a position to be threatened by security threats that originate from Afghanistan as it happened in 2001. So in general, I am optimistic that because of this and many other sort of tangentially related issues, the United States will actually stay the course, albeit with a much reduced number of troops.
Well, about this Taliban the pessimism that you mentioned, I believe that, yes, as I mentioned at the beginning, that we do support peace, but the mechanism has to be the right mechanism. Who are the victim of Taliban? Mainly the women of Afghanistan, who makes more than 50% of the population there. Do they really want that sort of peace with Taliban? This question mark. I don't think so. If they don't want. Who are the victims there in Afghanistan? To what cost do we want peace with Taliban? And if we want to start peace with Taliban, if we have got our own self-problem, we cannot really kind of reach peace with the others. Let me say that the first thing the government of Afghanistan have to do is that to really establish a sort of atmosphere and structure.
I would ask you, if the talks go further, would it have an effect on the internal balance within Afghanistan, the current structure?
Well, this talk is just very sort of government talk. It's not the Afghan people talk. This has been designed by Mr. Karzai, and it's continuing to be. Since we do have this talk, we have the situation has deteriorated so considerably. So therefore, we have lost a lot of people because of that. Why? Because we believe that the enemy is the friend. So therefore, we give sort of make sort of appeasement policy towards the enemy, while we're losing them almost every day. In fact, it's not that we divide them; they have divided us today.
Well, on the part of the US will stay or not, I would say yes, because
Yes, this is what this later goes.
they will stay because in their absence, the region, Afghanistan will be unstable and it will lead to regional instability, and that's not in favor of the US interests. And about talks, currently the Taliban and the government are fighting if a settlement is possible between these two, where they're very, very far away in terms of their hopes. It's not possible internally, so it certainly is possible.
Right, I think it's at the stage for a very good discussion. So, as the rules like last time, please identify yourself, ask sharp, incisive questions, and because the speakers have set a very good bar in terms of both sticking to time and making the points very, very sharp. So.
Thank you for all the informative presentations. I have a very quick question to Arian. I looked at the factors you put in. My name is Najeeb Manalai. I'm with Preparedness Consulting, the local company in Kabul, and I'll be speaking tomorrow on the company. But for Arian, the question, what I missed from the factors you had put in together to project that rather optimistic scenario was before the military or the security transition, there's not a transition in the coming. That's our own political. We have an elections coming up in 2 or 3 years. And can you give us a sense of what could happen then that could actually play a role in either an optimistic or a pessimistic scenario that we're looking at post-2014? That would be great actually, because overall, my sense is that the security transition or overall the situation as a whole is pretty much tied to political trends in the country. Can you give us a sense of factoring that in?
Is anyone else? The back.
Augustine, Channel News Asia. My question is for Mr. Masoud. I hear you, sir, you've used a range of phrases short of a total collapse of the government by 2014. What should or can happen between now and then to give the people of Afghanistan a chance to vote? Taking into consideration, I would like you to factor US elections, November, and the possibility of a whole new administration.
The last lady.
Hello, I'm Kuno Kripalani from the University of Hong Kong. I just want to bring up a very old-fashioned notion, which is that of nationalism, and hearing what Mr. Sharifi had to say and Mr. Masoud about tribal rivalries. What sort of training are the security forces getting? Is there a sense of Afghani nationalism? Is one question. And my second question is, if in the absence of that kind of nationalism as we understand it, is it easier for the Taliban as a religious force to be more of a unifying factor? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me start with the first question. I think a good way to rephrase what I said and sort of get my points across is to say this. The status quo in Afghanistan, in my view, the political issues, the security issues, the economic issues, is not good as an end result. This is not the end we as Afghans really want. So the status quo has to change for the better, hopefully. Now, the question is, how do we change the status quo to the better? Now, before addressing that question, we have to address the question as to whether or not we would be able to preserve the status quo after 2014. Because if we are not able to preserve the status quo after 2014, then everything would collapse and we would go just back to where we were in 2001, or even probably worse than that. So, in terms of how the elections would impact the transition, and the scenario I sort of outlined in my presentation is that I mainly focus on the political regime as a whole, and I said that what I mean by political regime is the real ideal and the processes upon which this political system was established in 2001. Now, for that reason, for me, it doesn't matter whether the government is led by Mr. Karzai or by somebody else, whether it's a presidential system or a parliamentary system. That is not a question for me. For me, it's basically the continuation and the survival of this regime, which is based on these ideals: democracy, human rights, etc., etc. The elections hopefully would have a positive impact on that transition. And what do I mean by that is that if we are able to continue the status quo, the present regime, beyond 2014, then we will have to go to the second question, the first question actually, which was how do we change the status quo for the better? And there is basically when the elections come in. And I do hope that after the next elections, we will have a much better team, a more competent team in power in Afghanistan that could address a host of new issues that could actually result in changing the status quo for the better. With regard to the tribal issues and ethnic issues in the Afghan national forces, I mean, one point, the main point is that the entire main reason behind creating a national army and a national police was to basically bring in ethnic people from the different ethnic groups together, to have them train together, to have them live together, and to have them conduct military operations together. I don't see any real big issues in the Afghan national forces, whether it be the police or the army, in terms of ethnicity issues. That, as Professor Jalali really explained it in detail, this whole issue of ethnic fractions and tribalism in Afghanistan really is a myth. I mean, when you go and live with these people, you don't really see that. And that's even less pronounced in the Afghan National Army and the police, because they are specifically organized and structured that way, and they're basically training together in that sense.
Can I just say that even if we believe in certain values, as my colleague has stated, that regardless of the regime or structure of power, we have to continue with that trend. Yes, I do agree, but the problem is that if we believe that democracy depends on the rule of law, and the rule of law, it depends on the government, a good governance, to really implement the law. If the government itself is breaking the law and going against the constitution, of course, we will not see democracy, and then vice versa, we will not see these values to continue. So that's why we really have to change the structure. This was one thing. The second thing about the sectarian, yes, I do believe Afghanistan have survived all this upheaval for the past 250 years or 300 years. None of the Islamic or national leaders of Afghanistan ever wanted Afghanistan to be disintegrated or to see Afghanistan partitioned. But the problem is that there were many rulers in Afghanistan, including today, that they use sectarian politics, not that because of Afghanistan want the sort of sectarianism or they want partition. No, the government of Afghanistan is using sectarian politics. That's the main problem. That has been the problem in the past, and that's the problem today.
I will link the issue of bringing ethnicity in between more linked to Western or to the US or other countries, and something that's not an Afghan thing. Because under the name of broad-based government, and in fact it was a policy of the early 20th century, and that is being implemented today. The West want to rely on leadership based on ethnicity or tribal identification. That doesn't work. And based on that policy, they brought, for example, one person representative of Hazara, the other representative of Pashtun, and the other representative of Tajik. They were brought by the Western countries here and were given power. And it's these people who use this point and create rifts among the people. Otherwise, the general public don't believe in it, and that's proved throughout the century.
Prof, thank you very much. My name is Ais, this is just a person. I've got 3 questions. First, with regard to the first speaker, I think that the international audience would find it quite puzzling with regard to the definition of international forces, which actually, the reality is Westphalia forces, with the exception of Singapore there, Korea there, and Japan there. But other than that, there is no other Asian involvement or African involvement. So the third definition should be rectified there. Now, with regard to Masoud, my apology, my sympathy not only to your brother, but also to all of you. The question is that, as you could, you did convey the question of divergence, the question of, the two sides of the coin. Now, my question here is that your formula, let's say yours is the A formula, and the other seems to be the B formula. There seems to be contradiction here. Now, the question is that the formulation problems here, in terms of the right solution for C factor. Now, would you be willing to compromise on your part too, just as the other forces? Do you think that Karzai is a minus factor than a plus factor? And would you want to say that on your part also, you're willing to have your leaders to be replaced too? Now, my third question with regard to the UN side. I noticed very hard to reconcile. Forgive me to migrate to another angle. The question of the disability of the UN's aid program with the base of Afghanistan with that of East Timor, for example. I compare to Fauzia, for example. The question is that the irregularity between the UN reception and perception, not only just the legal aid side, but also the sponsors and the programmers. There seems to be a world of divergence in terms of contribution. One, yeah, thanks a lot.
Hi, Tang Lee, just an ordinary blogger. Okay, we all know that the history of Afghanistan is basically you've been part of the great game. First it was the British and Russians playing each other off in Afghanistan. Then the Americans came in. First they backed Osama bin Laden and helped grow what is now Al-Qaeda. And then they turned again when Al-Qaeda attacked the US. Then they invaded Afghanistan and installed the Karzai regime. Now, just going back to the situation of the Middle East, where you had Egypt, Tunisia, throwing off, dictators who had been very pro-Western, and the people said enough is enough. Do we see a situation, is there a potential situation in Afghanistan where Afghani people say, we're tired of being played around by the outside world, be it East, the West, or the East, and we want something and a situation that is unique to Afghanistan? Thank you.
Is anyone else? The last question. Otherwise, we're just going to conclude this last round of comments. I'm going to start with this. You can answer questions and say any final thoughts.
Well, I couldn't give the last question about the UN, but I'm not allowed to speak on behalf of the UN. I'm not representing the UN. So that's solved. I just want to talk about the issue of reconciliation. One thing that's missing in Afghanistan is that there is a need to focus on reconciliation within the existing Afghan communities who are there accepting for obeying or abiding by the constitution. Like how many Taliban we will have? It might be 10,000, 20,000, maximum 50,000. And if you add their families, it won't make much. But what about the rest of 30 million of people? They don't, not all these 30 million support the current government. This is because of many of the rifts that were, as His Excellency Salazar mentioned, this is the legacy of the 30 years of war. So we need reconciliation within the Afghan communities, that they should understand that where we should go and how we can achieve that.
What about this compromise? May I just say that even with Taliban, when I say that we really have to be strong in order to deal with Taliban, even if we reach the peace with Taliban, we really have to pave the ground for that. What is the ground for that? If we have got different sets of values, as I mentioned before, then we really have to restructure or reform the political system through which that those who believe in sort of Talibanization or Taliban belief, they should have a democratic way to go and set up a sort of Taliban regime somewhere in Afghanistan. Those who have got democratic values, they should be allowed to really set up a sort of area so people can come and live under democratic values. Since these two values cannot add together, so therefore we really have to restructure the system of power for everyone to live in a united Afghanistan. That's the compromise that can be made. And the second thing about this experience of the United States of America, may I just say about this Arab world, the Arab Revolution? It has happened, but Afghanistan is very new in a case of, in those countries, they have been there for centuries, for decades. In Afghanistan, they have been for 10 years. 10 years, we have got, everybody has got its own judgment, how exactly the US behaved in Afghanistan and the Western world as a whole. So therefore, it's a bit early to really kind of judge what exactly is their policy and how should we deal with it.
Well, I don't think any question was actually pointed. The only thing was the definition of the word international. I think from an epistemology point of view, my understanding is that you can call anything international as long as more than one nation is involved. So that's it.
I think the international community has been a long hand for saying the United States or the United States of the West. So we all know the report that exists. But I think today's discussion, the afternoon discussion, I really want to thank the panelists for posing the issues sharply and to, I think we've generated some intensity and some passion about the difficulties that the process is going to face in the coming months and years. And I think these issues are going to be quite critical in terms of how the game, whatever you want to call it, in Afghanistan is going to play itself out in the coming years. And I think the two broad issues we try to raise, that the centrality of the outsider has been for the last 10 years. And before that, the intervention by the outsiders, by the dominant power, that the hesitation, the ambivalence within the United States injects a new level of complexity to this whole thing. And that many of the Europeans who went into the war saying, Iraq was a bad war, Afghanistan was a good war, so we're going to do this alliance management and be nice to the US. But once they got in there in the middle of the last decade, things started getting worse. Today it's not very clear how much strong the political support in Europe certainly is. And in the US, that we're seeing a situation where even a section of the Republican candidates, you have Ron Paul saying that, look, abolish the CIA, shut down, half the military. So there is a mood there, which is, I think, does not mean that you're going to see immediate changes in policy. But I think the fact is an exhausted United States capable of delivering what it is promising now. So, I mean, it's not a judgment on where the US is, but it is about the credibility, the sustainability of the kind of commitments that the US has taken. And we've seen it before in Vietnam, where when the warlords within Washington, the game between them changes, many of the commitments made to foreign friends and allies, they're not written in stone. That depends on the political situation within Washington, and that is the principal variable. So therefore, we've got to pay quite a bit of attention to how the situation there will evolve. And the second is the internal dynamic, and I think which we discussed with some depth. And the engagement with the Taliban, I think it's always a dangerous moment when you begin to talk, or even think of talking, when it produces fissures. And the fissures, some people are hoping that there'll be fissures in the Taliban. Some Taliban thinks it can produce fissures within the ruling coalition in Afghanistan. So therefore, who can hold the nerve longest, who can hold his own internal coalition strong, will have a bit greater chance of surviving the difficult process of actually changing the dynamic. And the last point that came through, I think, today was that the whole reorganization of the political system. Both in the earlier session, where both His Excellency Sani and Professor Jalali both talked about the center versus periphery issues, the question of parliamentary system versus presidential system, the question of empowering the regional governments. These issues, can all this be done in the reasonably short time in order to defend and secure what has been won for the last 10 years? And I think all of us will hope that tragedy in the last 33 years in Afghanistan will somehow come to an end. But it's not going to come to an end just because of goodwill. But it needs a good coalition, a good policy to be able to prevent a return to some of the worst things we've seen in Afghanistan. So please join me in thanking the three speakers who've really been.
Thank you, speakers. I would like to invite Professor Mohan to present tokens of appreciation to the panel of speakers. Mr. Masoud. Mr. Najeeb Manalai. Mr. Arian Sharifi. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of day one of the Afghanistan in Transition workshop. On behalf of ISAS, I thank you for your active participation and support. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow for a stimulating discussion. Thank you.